The shuttle descended through a storm of frozen lightning, each crackle of energy illuminating the endless wasteland of the ice planet, known to the galaxy only as Carthion. Beneath the storm, jagged mountains of frozen crystal clawed at the sky, and rivers of liquid methane glowed faintly under the pale light of twin moons. No colony dared remain here long. Carthion was a world of death, of eternal winter, and yet it was whispered in every dark corner of space that a throne of ice rested at its core. A throne ruled by a queen said to be older than empires, stronger than armies, and colder than the void itself. Elias Carter, decorated soldier turned reluctant emissary, felt the vibration of the shuttle beneath his boots as the pilot fought the storm. His orders were simple: deliver the Council's proposal and leave. No negotiations, no friendship, just words wrapped in fear. The Galactic Council wanted peace with Carthion, or at least a fragile truce. But the stories he had heard since his childhood echoed in his mind with every shudder of the ship. They said the Ice Planet Queen had no heart. The words weren't metaphor. To the people of the galaxy, she was not just merciless. She was inhuman, a being carved from permafrost, incapable of compassion, immune to pleas. She had ruled Carthion for centuries, unchallenged, untouchable, striking fear into those who dared trespass on her frozen domain. Legends claimed her court was littered with the frozen statues of those who once tried to deceive her. Others swore that her gaze alone could turn blood to ice. Elias never believed fairy tales. But as the shuttle bucked under another wave of storm energy, a strange chill settled in his chest, something deeper than fear. A pull. Touchdown in 5, the pilot called, his voice strained as he wrestled with the controls. Stay sharp, emissary. If the stories are true, she'll tear you apart before you reach her throne. Elias gave no answer. He strapped on his cloak, sealed against the biting wind, and checked the holocube that contained the Council's message. But his thoughts strayed from duty. The galaxy painted her as a monster, yet here he was, chosen not for politics but for survival. Of all the soldiers in the fleet, he had been the only one who had not flinched when her name was spoken. Perhaps bravery, perhaps foolishness. Time would decide. The shuttle landed hard on a plateau of ice, skidding across the frozen surface before stabilizers locked in place. The hatch opened with a metallic groan, and a wall of wind slammed into him, so cold it felt alive. Elias stepped out, boots crunching against crystalline frost. The horizon stretched endlessly, pale blue glaciers meeting a dark sky lit only by storms. And at the center, rising like a spear of jagged brilliance, a palace of ice stood against the heavens. It was not built, he realized, but grown, like the planet itself had shaped its queen's fortress. Armed guards awaited him at the gates. They were not human. Their frames were massive, draped in armor forged of frozen obsidian, their eyes glowing faintly blue. They spoke no words, only gestured for him to follow. He obeyed, his breath forming vapor in the thin, cold air. Inside the palace, silence reigned. Walls glittered with frozen light, reflections of torches trapped eternally within crystalline surfaces. He passed statues frozen mid-movement, their expressions locked in agony. For a moment his stomach twisted. Were they prisoners or warnings? The guards led him through spiraling halls until the air itself felt heavy, pressing against his lungs. Then the chamber opened, vast and echoing, and at its heart, upon a throne of jagged crystal, sat the figure the galaxy feared, the Ice Queen. She was taller than any human woman, her frame wrapped in flowing robes spun from silver and frost. Her skin glowed faintly blue, as though veins of frozen starlight ran beneath it. A crown of sharp, crystalline shards encircled her brow, catching the faint light and scattering it in cold radiance. But it was her eyes that froze him to the spot. They were not hollow, not dead, but burning with an amber light that contradicted every tale he had heard. They were fierce, intelligent, merciless perhaps, but alive. The guards bowed and withdrew, leaving him alone with her. "You are far from the warmth of your worlds." Her voice rolled like thunder across the chamber, soft yet commanding. Why does the council send a mortal into my storm? Elias swallowed the frost in his throat, stepping forward. I'm Elias Carter, emissary of the Galactic Council. I come with a message of truce. He held out the holocube, but his hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer gravity of her presence. Her gaze flicked to the cube, but she did not move. Truce, she said, as though testing the word. Do they think I'm blind to their fear? They dress their terror as diplomacy. They whisper that I have no heart. Do you believe this, human? The question pierced deeper than he expected. He should have answered with the script prepared for him, cold and diplomatic. Yet as her eyes burned into his, the words caught in his throat. I believe, he began slowly, that fear often speaks louder than truth. For the first time her expression shifted. A faint tilt of her head, a whisper of curiosity. And what truth do you see when you look upon me? He hesitated. The right answer could mean survival. The wrong one could mean death. But something in him, something reckless, refused to repeat the words of others. I see a ruler who has been alone too long. A queen not without heart, but forced to bury it in ice. The chamber grew deathly still. Her guards, stationed at the far end, stiffened, as if waiting for his execution. The queen rose slowly, her figure towering, robes whispering across the frozen floor. Step by step, she descended from her throne, the very air freezing sharper with each movement. She stopped before him, so close he could feel the cold radiating from her skin. You presume much, human. Her words were cold as glaciers, yet her eyes betrayed something else, a spark, faint but undeniable. Elias bowed his head, but his voice did not falter. I speak only what I see, my queen. For a long heartbeat, silence hung between them, a silence heavy with danger, yet threaded with something unexpected. Then she turned, her robe swirling like a storm, and ascended her throne once more. You may deliver your message, she said, her tone measured. But know this, no council, no army, no galaxy binds me, and if you lie, your body will join the statues in my hall. Elias activated the holocube, his voice steady though his pulse raced. As the council's words echoed across the chamber, he realized something the stories had never said. The queen did not look like a monster. She looked like someone who had once been human and had lost something so profound that the galaxy mistook grief for cruelty. And in that moment, Elias felt a truth stir inside him. The galaxy was wrong. The Ice Planet Queen had a heart. It was simply locked in frost. He didn't know why, but he felt certain he was meant to be the one to melt it. If you want to see how this dangerous and forbidden story unfolds, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. The journey of Elias and the Ice Queen has only just begun. The holocube dimmed, its final words fading into the cavernous silence of the throne room. Elias kept his eyes forward, posture straight, though every instinct screamed to step back from the woman who could end his life with a single gesture. The queen leaned back against her throne, one hand draped elegantly across its jagged armrest, her gaze fixed upon him as if weighing not only his words, but the very fabric of his soul. You recite their offers well, she said, her voice carrying a sharp edge beneath its calm surface. But I hear no truth in their promises. They want my silence, not my friendship. They want my power dormant, not my hand in alliance. Elias opened his mouth to speak, but hesitated. Diplomacy required reassurance, perhaps a lie, but she would see through it. Instead, he asked the question that had burned in his chest since the storm swallowed their shuttle. Then what do you want, my queen? The chamber stilled, even the guards shifting as if surprised by his boldness. For a heartbeat she remained silent, amber eyes locked on him. Then slowly a smile, faint, unreadable, touched her lips. You are either very brave or very foolish to ask me such a thing. Perhaps both, Elias admitted, surprising himself with the honesty in his tone. Her expression hardened again, but the spark lingered. What I want is not for the council to decide. They send you here to speak of peace, but peace is born not from words, human, but from respect. Tell me, Why should I respect a galaxy that calls me a monster? Elias drew a breath, steadying himself. The truth was dangerous, yet the moment demanded it. Because monsters don't keep thrones. Monsters destroy, they consume. But you rule. You preserve your world. You protect your people. That is not the act of a monster. For the briefest flicker of time, something softened in her gaze, though it vanished as quickly as it appeared. Careful, human, she said, her tone sharper now. Flattery will not keep you warm in Carthion's storms. I don't flatter, he replied, voice calm but unwavering. I've seen monsters. You are not one. The throne room echoed with silence. Then the queen rose again, her towering presence descending from the dais. Her steps reverberated like the crack of ice breaking under pressure. She stopped within arm's reach, her breath visible in the cold air between them. Elias held his ground, her hand lifted, not to strike, though every muscle in his body braced for it, but to touch the air near his chest, just above the badge of the council glinting faintly in the dim light. You wear their mark, she said softly, almost to herself. Yet your eyes do not carry their lies. Elias swallowed. Because I came here with their message, but I will leave here with yours. If you let me. The queen's hand dropped to her side, her gaze narrowing. She turned away sharply, her robes swirling in a storm of frost. We will see if you are worthy of carrying my words, she declared. She gestured to the guards, who stepped forward with synchronized precision. Take him to the chambers. He will stay as my guest, under watch. The guards flanked Elias without a word. He glanced at the queen, but she no longer looked at him, her attention fixed on the frozen patterns carved into her throne. He followed the guards out, the heavy doors closing behind him, with a sound like glaciers grinding together. The corridors twisted like veins of ice through the palace. Elias tried to memorize the path, though the crystalline walls reflected endlessly, disorienting him. Finally, they arrived at a chamber carved into the ice itself. A simple bed of furs, a table of sculpted crystal, and a single torch burning with a blue flame gave the room an austere yet strangely regal air. The guards left him with a final warning glance before sealing the door. Elias sat on the edge of the bed, exhaling a long breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what had just transpired. He had spoken truths no emissary was meant to speak, and somehow, instead of freezing him with her wrath, the queen had spared him. He pressed his palms together, recalling the moment her eyes softened, the fraction of a second when she seemed less like a force of nature and more like a woman, a ruler burdened with solitude, perhaps even longing. The torchlight flickered, casting strange shadows across the icy walls. He wondered how many emissaries had walked these halls before him, and how many never left. Yet for reasons he could not yet grasp, he felt that his fate here would be different. The hours stretched, the cold seeping into his bones despite the furs. He was drifting near sleep when the door opened without sound. Elias sat upright instantly, his hand instinctively reaching for a weapon he no longer carried. But it was not a guard, it was her. The Ice Queen entered, her presence filling the chamber with an almost unbearable gravity. She moved with the silence of falling snow, her robes whispering against the frozen floor. The torchlight bent in her presence, catching on her crystalline crown, bathing her features in a pale glow. You are restless, she said, her voice softer than in the throne room. Not a question, a statement. Elias rose slowly to his feet. The cold doesn't sleep, and neither do I. Her lips curved in the faintest shadow of amusement. You speak like one who has lived among storms. I've lived among wars, he corrected quietly. She studied him, her gaze searching as though peeling back layers of his soul. For a moment Elias thought she would demand his history, but instead she asked, Do you fear me? He hesitated. The easy answer would be yes, the safe answer yes. But truth had guided him thus far, and he sensed lies would shatter the fragile thread between them. I fear what you can do, he admitted, but not who you are. Her eyes widened faintly, the amber light in them glowing brighter. She stepped closer, so near he could feel the chill radiating from her body. Yet beneath it there was something else, an energy, raw and magnetic, pulling him toward her. "No one has ever spoken to me this way," she murmured, her tone carrying not anger but something akin to wonder. Maybe no one ever dared. The silence that followed was thick, charged, as though the very ice around them held its breath. She lifted her hand again, and this time her fingers brushed his cloak, light as snow falling on skin. Elias stood motionless, his heartbeat thundering in his chest. Then, as suddenly as she had come, she withdrew, stepping back into the shadows. "Rest, emissary," she said, her voice returning to its commanding cadence. "Tomorrow you will see why they call me heartless." Before he could answer, she turned and left, the door sealing with a soft hiss. Elias remained standing, breath unsteady, the ghost of her touch lingering against him like frost that burned instead of froze. For the first time since landing on Carthion, he realized he was not afraid of her judgment or her wrath. He was afraid of something far more dangerous. He was afraid of wanting her. Dawn on Carthion was no softer than its night. The light that crept over the frozen peaks was pale, almost spectral, casting long shadows across the palace walls. Elias woke to the sound of the chamber doors unlocking, his body stiff from the biting chill that lingered even under the heavy furs. He rose quickly, his instincts sharpened from years of military training, but what greeted him was no threat, only two guards, armored in black ice, their eyes glowing faintly as they motioned for him to follow. He was led through the twisting halls, each turn reminding him of the labyrinthine nature of this palace, until they emerged onto a balcony high above the frozen plains. The air was thin, sharp, and so cold it seemed to carve into his lungs. Below, the landscape stretched endlessly, jagged glaciers, canyons of frozen gas, and rivers of liquid methane shimmering like glass. Yet his gaze was not on the land, but on the assembly gathered on the courtyard far beneath the balcony. Hundreds of armored figures stood in formation, weapons glinting in the pale light. Their discipline was absolute, their silence louder than 1,000 war drums. At their head, upon a platform carved of translucent crystal, stood the queen. Her crown caught the light of the twin moons, scattering it in a halo around her head. She raised her arm, and the entire host fell to one knee. The sound of armor striking ice echoing through the vast canyon below. "This is why they call me heartless," she said, her voice carrying easily even to the balcony where Elias stood. "Because when the galaxy sends its armies against me, I do not hesitate. I do not forgive. I carve my will into the bones of worlds, and none stand against it." Her eyes turned upward, locking onto him. Even at this distance, Elias felt the weight of her gaze. The guards beside him stiffened, but she gestured, and they stepped back, leaving him alone at the edge of the balcony. "Tell me, emissary," she called, her words echoing through the frozen air. "Do you still see a queen with a buried heart, or only a conqueror carved from ice?" Elias hesitated, every pair of glowing eyes in the courtyard trained upon him. The truth once more clawed at his throat, dangerous and necessary. He raised his voice, steady though his heart pounded. "I see a queen who protects what is hers, who rules without chains, without bending to empires. If that makes you heartless, then the galaxy fears the wrong thing." A murmur swept through the assembly below, a ripple of sound like wind stirring the surface of a frozen lake. The queen lifted her hand, and silence fell once more. For a heartbeat, her lips curved, the faintest trace of something softer than the frost she wore like armor. Then it was gone, replaced by the steel of command. "Bring him down," she ordered. The guards flanked him once more, guiding him through winding stairways until he emerged onto the courtyard floor. The soldiers parted, their gazes like knives as he passed, until he stood upon the platform beside her throne of ice. From this vantage, he could see the enormity of her host, a sea of warriors bound to her will. The queen rose to her full height, towering above even the tallest of her guards. She extended her arm, pointing to the horizon where a fissure split the frozen plains. Today, emissary, you will witness why peace with Carthion cannot be bought with words. You will see what it means to be ruled by one without a heart. A horn sounded, low and resonant, and from the fissure emerged figures that made Elias's blood run colder than the wind. Prisoners, dozens of them, chained in groups, their features half hidden by frost and fear. Not all were human. There were aliens of many kinds, captured soldiers of past battles, their armor broken, their eyes hollow. They stumbled into the courtyard under the watch of guards, collapsing to their knees before the queen's throne. Elias's stomach twisted. He had seen prisoners of war before, but something in their silence unsettled him. They did not beg, they did not cry. They only stared at the frozen ground, as though hope itself had been stripped away. The queen's voice cut through the stillness. These are the remnants of the council's armies. They came to Carthion with fire, seeking to burn my world. They fell to the storm. What fate do you think befits them, emissary? Every eye turned to Elias. His throat tightened. The council's orders were clear. He was to show no weakness, no sympathy. Yet the weight of the queen's gaze, the faint question hidden beneath her amber eyes, demanded something more. They came as enemies, Elias said carefully, his voice carrying across the courtyard. But they still breathe. That means they can change. Death ends nothing. Mercy creates loyalty. A sharp intake of breath ran through the assembly, as though he had spoken blasphemy. The queen stepped closer, her towering presence blotting out the pale light. Mercy, she repeated, her tone heavy with disbelief. You dare speak of mercy in my court? Do you not see their blood on the snow of my world? Do you not smell the fire they sought to bring here? Elias met her eyes, refusing to lower his gaze. I see people who could be broken forever or forged into something stronger. If you kill them, you prove the council right, that you have no heart. But if you spare them, he paused, feeling the silence grow denser around him. Then you show them, and the galaxy, that your strength is greater than cruelty. The queen studied him, her expression unreadable. The courtyard waited, the air so tense it seemed ready to shatter. Finally, she raised her hand. The guards lifted their weapons. For a heartbeat, Elias feared he had pushed too far. But then her hand fell, not in command of death, but in dismissal. Release them, she ordered. The courtyard erupted in stunned murmurs. The prisoners were unshackled, their chains falling to the ice with a clatter that echoed like thunder. Some looked up in disbelief, others simply collapsed in exhaustion. The queen's soldiers shifted uneasily, confusion etched in their rigid discipline. She turned to Elias, her gaze piercing. Do not mistake this for weakness, human. I grant them life, not because you asked it, but because I wish to see if your words bear truth. If they do not, their deaths will be upon your conscience. Elias bowed his head slightly, relief washing through him, though he dared not show it. Then let me carry that weight, my queen. Her eyes lingered on him, the faintest flicker of something stirring behind their amber glow. Then she turned, her robes whispering as she ascended her throne once more. Watch closely, emissary. You have asked me to bear a heart I do not possess. Let us see if you can survive the storm it unleashes. The horn sounded again, and the soldiers dispersed, the courtyard returning to its frozen silence. Elias stood alone before the throne, the weight of her challenge heavy upon him. He had bent the course of her will, if only slightly. Yet in her warning, he sensed not only danger, but the beginning of something far more dangerous. For the first time, the Ice Queen had chosen not to prove her cruelty, but to test his faith. And that test, Elias realized, might cost him more than his life. It might cost him his heart. The release of the prisoners echoed through the palace like a crack in ancient ice. Word spread faster than the storm winds outside the fortress walls. Soldiers whispered in corridors, servants glanced nervously at one another, and even the great halls that once rang with silence now hummed with unease. The Ice Queen had chosen to spare lives, and though her word was absolute, doubt gnawed at her court. Elias felt it as soon as he was escorted back through the winding halls. Eyes lingered longer on him now, filled not only with suspicion, but with something sharper, resentment. He was the stranger who had dared to speak before the queen, the outsider whose words had swayed her decision. And for many in her realm, that was a wound to their pride. That evening he sat in his chamber, staring at the frost creeping along the crystalline walls. His thoughts churned like the storms outside. He had spoken boldly, perhaps recklessly, but he could not regret it. To see her hesitate, to see her choose restraint over bloodshed, it was proof that beneath her icy armor, something still beat like a heart. Yet even as the memory gave him hope, a gnawing fear grew. What if he had pushed too hard? What if her court would not forgive the human who had altered her judgment? A knock at the door startled him from his thoughts. It opened before he could answer, and a figure stepped inside. Not the queen, not a guard, but a man clad in armor etched with jagged patterns of frost. His eyes glowed faintly blue, though not as bright as the queen's chosen guard captains. He moved with a swagger, the kind of confidence bred not of loyalty, but of ambition. "You're braver than you look," the man said, his voice low, almost mocking. "Or perhaps just stupid. Few speak to the queen as you did today. Fewer still survive it." Elias remained seated, though his body tensed. "And yet here I am." The man smirked, stepping closer. "Here you are indeed. Elias, emissary of the council, breaker of chains. Tell me, did you come here to sway her heart or to steal her throne?" "I came with a message," Elias replied evenly, though he could feel the man's words digging at something fragile inside him. "Nothing more?" The stranger leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Then let me give you a message in return. She is not for you. She's not for anyone. Those who think otherwise end up as statues in her hall. Do you understand?" Their eyes locked, silence stretching taut between them. Finally Elias spoke, his tone quiet but unyielding. "I understand that fear makes men say many things. Tell me, are you warning me out of loyalty to your queen or jealousy?" The man's smirk faltered for the briefest instant. He pushed off the wall and turned toward the door. "Be careful, human. The storm is always watching." And then he was gone, leaving Elias with more questions than answers. Sleep came fitfully that night, broken by dreams of amber eyes glowing in the dark, of frost that melted beneath his touch, only to freeze again stronger than before. When dawn came, it brought no peace, only summons. The guards led him to a chamber unlike any he had yet seen. It was vast, circular, its walls lined with towering pillars of ice that pulsed faintly with inner light. At the center stood the queen, draped in robes of silver and blue, her presence commanding, unshakable. Around her, members of her council were gathered, generals, advisors, captains of her legions. Their eyes followed Elias with a mixture of contempt and suspicion. "You arrive," the queen said, her voice echoing softly, yet carrying to every corner of the chamber. "My council doubts your purpose here. They believe you are a danger. I have called you to answer them." Elias stepped forward, the weight of their gazes heavy upon him. "I came as an emissary, nothing more. If danger follows me, it is only because truth unsettles those who fear it." A murmur rippled through the council. One of the generals, a towering figure with shoulders like stone, stepped forward, his voice booming. "Your words sow weakness, human. Our queen's mercy today will be seen as fragility. The galaxy respects only strength. If she falters, they will come again in greater force." "Strength is not diminished by restraint," Elias countered. "Mercy can inspire fear just as much as death. Which is more terrifying, that your queen kills without hesitation, or that she chooses who lives and dies by her will alone?" The chamber fell silent. Even the general seemed struck by the weight of the words. The queen's eyes flickered, studying him with something deeper than scrutiny, something like recognition. But another voice cut through the stillness. The man from the night before. He stepped forward, bowing slightly to the queen before turning his gaze on Elias. "Your tongue is clever, human, but words are wind. Let us test him, Majesty. Let us see if his heart is as strong as his mouth." The queen regarded him, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded. "Very well. The emissary shall be tested." Elias's jaw tightened. "Tested how?" The man smiled, a predator's smile. A trial by storm. If he survives, perhaps his words carry truth. If he fails, he spread his hands. Then we know his purpose was never worthy. The queen rose from her throne, her robes whispering like snow across ice. Prepare the trial. Tonight, under the twin moons, the storm will decide his fate. The council bowed, murmuring in approval. Only Elias remained upright, his heart pounding but his gaze steady. He met her eyes, and for the briefest instant, he thought he saw something there, a flicker of concern, buried deep beneath the frost. As the guards escorted him from the chamber, Elias felt the weight of what lay ahead. The storm of Carthion was no ordinary tempest. It was a force that broke ships, that stripped flesh from bone, that had swallowed armies whole. To face it was not a test of skill, but of will, of survival against the impossible. And yet, as the doors closed behind him, he felt a strange calm settle over him. For the first time since setting foot on this frozen world, he knew with certainty that his path and the Queen's were entwined. Whatever the storm brought, it would not end in death. It would end in revelation. Night fell quickly on Carthion. The twin moons climbed the sky like pale watchers, their light scattering across endless sheets of ice, turning the world into a silver sea. The air grew sharper, colder, so thin that each breath Elias drew felt like glass cutting into his lungs. Guards marched him from his chamber, their armor clinking with the rhythm of inevitability. He knew where they were taking him even before the massive gates opened onto the plains. The trial by storm. He had heard whispers of it since arriving, stories passed in fearful tones by servants and soldiers alike. To be cast into the storm was not punishment, it was erasure. The gales could strip a man to bone, the frozen lightning could shatter stone. No one survived, they said, no one but the Queen herself. The courtyard had been transformed into an arena of sorts. Warriors stood in a circle, their faces hidden beneath helmets of black ice. Torches burned with blue flame, their light flickering against the jagged walls. At the far end, elevated on a dais carved from translucent crystal, sat the Queen. Her robes of frost shimmered in the moonlight, her crown scattering shards of brilliance, her amber eyes fixed on Elias as though she alone held the thread of his fate. The man who had challenged him, the one with ambition etched in every smirk, stepped forward. "Tonight," he declared, his voice carrying over the howling wind, "the human faces the storm. He claims mercy is strength. Let the storm judge him. If he survives, perhaps his words are not lies. If he falls, then Carthion is cleansed of weakness." The crowd rumbled in approval. Elias stood silent, his breath misting in the icy air. He did not look at the man, but at her, at the Queen. Her face betrayed nothing, but her eyes, those burning amber eyes, lingered on him longer than they should have. The gates opened. Beyond them, the storm writhed like a living beast. Frozen lightning split the sky in jagged arcs, and winds screamed across the plains with the voice of 1,000 wraiths. The ground trembled under the force of it, as though even the planet itself feared the tempest it birthed. Elias stepped forward. Guards removed his cloak, his furs, leaving him with only a layer of armor thinner than he wished. His breath caught at the bite of the cold, but he did not falter. To falter now would be death long before the storm touched him. The man's smirk widened. "Enjoy your mercy, human." Without another word, Elias walked into the storm. The gates slammed shut behind him, sealing him into a world of chaos. The wind struck first, a wall of force that nearly drove him to his knees. He braced himself, leaning into the gale, each step a battle against invisible hands that sought to throw him down. Ice crystals stung his skin like shards of glass, cutting lines across his cheeks. His hands grew numb, his breath shallow. Lightning tore across the sky, a spear of blue fire that struck the ground 100 paces away. The ice erupted, shards flying like daggers. Elias raised his arms to shield his face, the impact knocking him backward. He hit the ground hard, the breath ripped from his chest. For a moment he lay there, staring up at the storm that howled like a god enraged. "This is madness," he thought. No man survives this. No test proves anything but cruelty. And yet somewhere within the gale, he felt her eyes on him. Not in truth, perhaps. She was far behind, safe in her throne, but in spirit. He felt her watching, waiting, testing. He forced himself to his feet, every muscle screaming in protest. He pushed forward step by step into the teeth of the storm. Hours, or perhaps only minutes, bled together in a blur of cold and pain. He stumbled across fissures where rivers of liquid methane bubbled, glowing faintly beneath thin ice. He climbed ridges of crystal that cut into his palms. He crawled when he could no longer walk, his armor heavy as stone, his body burning and freezing all at once. The storm roared around him, unrelenting. At one point he collapsed, face pressed into the snow, lungs heaving. His vision blurred, black creeping at the edges. It would be so easy to stop, to let the storm take him, to surrender to its eternal embrace. But in the darkness of his fading mind, he saw her. The queen's face carved in frost, yet with eyes that burned like fire. If you fall, you prove them right. The thought cut deeper than any wound. He forced himself up, his hands shaking, his body broken, but his will unbending. He staggered forward again. Far above, on the balcony of her palace, the queen watched. She stood apart from her council, apart from her soldiers, her amber eyes fixed upon the tiny figure fighting against the fury of her world. She remembered others who had faced the storm. None had lasted as long as this human. None had risen after the storm first broke them. And yet he rose again and again, defying death with every step. Her counsel whispered around her, voices sharp with mockery. He will not last the hour. Already the storm takes him. This human is nothing. But she did not answer them. For in the hollow of her chest, where no heart was said to beat, something stirred. The storm grew worse. Frozen lightning struck again, closer this time. The blast hurled Elias across the ice, his armor cracking, his body screaming in agony. He landed hard, his vision going white with pain. His arm hung useless at his side, broken. He could not rise. He could not move. The storm howled, triumphant, its voice filling the world. This is the end. Then, through the haze of his failing senses, he saw it. A shard of crystal, glowing faintly in the stormlight, embedded in the ground before him. He reached for it with trembling fingers, clutching it to his chest. Its glow pulsed faintly, steady like a heartbeat. And in that moment, something inside him refused to yield. He pushed against the ice, his broken body screaming, and stood once more. He lifted the shard high, its glow cutting through the storm, a beacon against the void. Far above, the queen's eyes widened. The shard was no ordinary crystal. It was a fragment of Carthion itself, a piece of the planet's frozen core. To hold it was to hold the essence of her world. And it had chosen him. The storm shifted. The winds screamed louder, then suddenly fell silent, as though bowing to the light of the shard. Lightning ceased, clouds parted, and for the first time in centuries, the sky above Carthion cleared. Stars burned sharp and bright, 1,000 fires reflected in endless ice. The soldiers gasped, murmuring in disbelief. The ambitious man who had challenged Elias clenched his fists, his face dark with fury. And the queen, she stepped forward, her breath catching, though she would never admit it. The gates opened. Elias staggered back into the courtyard, broken, bloodied, but alive. The shard still pulsed in his hand, its light casting long shadows across the stunned assembly. He fell to his knees, his strength gone, but he did not release the shard. The queen descended from her dais, every step echoing like thunder. She stopped before him, towering, her eyes burning brighter than the shard itself. "Impossible," one of her generals whispered. "No," she said softly, her voice carrying through the silence. "Not impossible, chosen." She bent down, her hand brushing his as she touched the shard. For a brief instant their fingers met, the frost of her skin mingling with the blood on his. And in that touch something shattered. For centuries they had said she had no heart. But as her eyes met his, the lie trembled, ready to break. The shard's glow lingered long after the storm had passed. Its pale blue light pulsed faintly in Elias's palm as though alive, steady like a heartbeat that was not his own. The soldiers stared in silence, their armor reflecting its brilliance, none daring to speak. For centuries, the trial by storm had been the final judgment of Carthion, a death sentence disguised as tradition. Yet the storm had not taken him. It had bowed. Elias knelt on the icy floor of the courtyard, his body trembling, broken but not defeated. Blood streaked his face. His arm hung useless at his side, yet he would not release the shard. It was more than survival, it was proof. Proof that he was not just another emissary, not another fool sent to die. Proof that the storm itself had chosen him. The queen stood before him, her eyes fixed on the shard. The faintest tremor passed through her lips, though no words escaped them. Around her, the murmurs of her court grew louder, voices sharpened by disbelief and fear. "This is sorcery," one general growled, his hand gripping the hilt of his blade. "No," another countered, his voice heavy with awe. "It is the will of Carthion. The shard would have frozen him to ash if he were unworthy." The ambitious man who had proposed the trial stepped forward, his face pale, but his voice dripping with venom. "Majesty, this is a trick. He planted the shard, or the storm faltered by chance. No outsider can wield the heart of Carthion. It is an insult to your throne." The queen's gaze snapped to him, sharp as a blade. "Enough!" The courtyard fell silent at her command. She turned back to Elias, who struggled to rise. For a moment she hesitated, then extended her hand. Her skin, pale as carved ice, brushed his blood-stained fingers. The shard's glow flared, casting their joined hands in radiant light. A gasp ran through the crowd. "He is chosen," she said, her voice steady but carrying something deeper, something even she did not fully understand. "By the storm, by Carthion itself. He lives not because of chance, but because fate wills it so." The words struck like a hammer across the court. Some bowed their heads in reverence. Others clenched their fists in fury. But none dared speak against her decree. Elias swayed, exhaustion threatening to pull him under. The queen gestured, and 2 guards stepped forward, not to drag him as prisoner, but to carry him gently. "Take him to the healer's chamber," she ordered. "See that his wounds are tended. He will recover under my protection." The ambitious man's jaw tightened, his teeth grinding, but he said nothing. His eyes followed Elias with a venom that needed no words. The healer's chamber was carved deep into the palace walls, a sanctum of warmth compared to the frozen halls. Crystal conduits glowed softly, channeling heat from the planet's core into the room. Furs lined the bed where Elias lay, his broken arm bound in shimmering bands of ice that did not freeze but soothed, their energy numbing the pain. He drifted between sleep and waking, haunted by fragments of the storm, the howling wind, the crack of frozen lightning, the shard's glow. Yet always, always there were her eyes. Amber fire in the heart of frost. When he woke fully, she was there. The queen sat in silence beside his bed, her robes pooled like melted silver around her. She studied him with an expression he could not name. Not anger, not pity, but something caught between curiosity and the faintest trace of wonder. "You should be dead," she said softly, her voice stripped of the thunder it carried in the throne room. "Should be," Elias rasped, his throat dry, but the storm thought otherwise. Her gaze flicked to the shard resting on the table beside him, its glow steady. "The shard has never chosen one outside my bloodline. Even my own generals cannot touch it without frostbite. Yet you—" She trailed off, her eyes narrowing as though the sight of him defied the order of the universe. Elias shifted painfully, his body heavy as stone. Maybe it wasn't about blood. Maybe it was about truth. "I didn't fight the storm to conquer it. I fought to survive, to prove I wasn't a liar." Her lips pressed together, as if his words unsettled her more than the storm itself. For centuries her world had told the same story, that she had no heart, that she ruled with ice in her veins. And yet here sat a man whose heart beat so loudly it seemed to echo through the walls of her fortress. "Why?" she asked at last, her voice lower, almost vulnerable. "Why risk death for words that mean nothing to me? You are not of Carthion. You owe me nothing." Elias met her gaze, his voice rough but firm. Because if I left here without speaking truth, then I'd be no different than those who fear you. And I don't fear you, my queen, not who you are." The silence stretched heavy until finally she rose. "Rest!" she commanded, though the edge in her voice had dulled. She turned toward the door, her robes whispering. But before leaving, she paused. Without looking back, she said, "The storm revealed something in you. Whether it is strength or folly, we will see." And then she was gone. Days passed. Elias healed slowly under the care of the healers, the shard never leaving his side. Its glow comforted him, a reminder of the storm's strange judgment. Yet with each day, whispers in the halls grew louder. Soldiers passed him with narrowed eyes. Servants bowed more stiffly. The court, once united in fear of their queen, was fracturing under his presence. It was one evening, as he limped through a frost-lit corridor, that the ambitious man appeared again. He blocked the passage, his armor gleaming like a frozen cliff, his smirk venomous. "You think surviving the storm makes you one of us?" he sneered. "You think her glance means favor? You're a toy, human, a distraction. Nothing more." Elias stood his ground, though pain rippled through his body. "If I'm nothing, then why are you so afraid?" The man's smile cracked, fury spilling through. He stepped closer, his voice a whisper dripping with venom. "Because she looks at you the way she was meant to look at me." Their eyes locked, a storm of hatred and jealousy between them. Elias did not flinch. "Then perhaps you should ask yourself why." The man's hand twitched near his blade, but footsteps echoed down the hall. Guards approached, and with a final glare he stepped aside, his parting words sharp as knives. "Enjoy your days, human. They will be short." Elias continued on, the weight of those words heavy but not unexpected. The Queen's court was a battlefield of its own, and he had just become its center. That night, as he lay awake, the door opened again without sound. She entered, her presence filling the room like moonlight. This time she carried no crown, no robes of state, only a cloak of silver fur. She stood beside his bed, her amber eyes softened by shadows. "You should not walk the halls alone," she said quietly. "There are those who would see you fall before you stand." Elias's lips curved faintly, weary but honest. "And yet here you are." For a moment, the Ice Queen, the heartless, the merciless, the eternal storm, looked almost human. Almost fragile. She reached for the shard, her fingers brushing against his. Their hands lingered together, the light pulsing between them. "They say I have no heart," she whispered. "But when you hold this, it beats." Elias's breath caught. In that single moment he knew. The storm had not chosen him by chance. It had chosen him for her. The days that followed were colder, though not from the weather outside. The storm had passed, the skies of Carthion clearer than most could remember, but within the palace walls the air thickened with suspicion. Whispers slithered through the corridors like icy serpents. Soldiers exchanged glances when Elias passed, their eyes narrowing not in curiosity now, but in open disdain. Servants avoided him, bowing stiffly before scurrying away, as though even his presence was dangerous. Elias endured it silently. He had faced armies, hunger, and death before. Whispers could not wound him, not compared to the storm. And yet, it was not his own survival that gnawed at him, but the look he sometimes caught in the Queen's eyes when she thought no one else noticed. She was not a woman easily shaken, but she could feel her court fracturing beneath her, and for the first time, the whispers were not about her. They were about him. One evening, the Queen summoned her council to the great chamber. Elias was brought as well, though the guards flanking him carried themselves differently now. Their grips on their weapons were tighter, their strides sharper, as though preparing for blood. The council chamber blazed with blue torches, their flames crackling against walls of living ice. The Queen sat upon her throne, regal and untouchable, though her gaze burned brighter than the torches. Around her, generals and advisers circled like wolves, their voices overlapping in a chorus of dissent. "He corrupts your judgment, Majesty," one said, slamming his fist against his chest plate. "Since the human came, you show hesitation. You spared prisoners. You risked our strength for his words. Another leaned forward, her face hidden beneath a mask of frost. Your mercy spreads like cracks through the glacier. Already some soldiers doubt. If they doubt you, they will betray you. The ambitious man stepped forward last, his smile a sharpened blade. Majesty, let me end this farce. He is not chosen, he is cursed. Send him back into the storm, or let me kill him here and now. The people will cheer. They will know you remain untouchable. The chamber trembled with their fury, the sound like 100 storms confined within crystalline walls. Elias said nothing, though his jaw tightened. He wanted to speak, but this was not his battle to fight. It was hers. The queen raised her hand, and silence struck the chamber like lightning. She rose slowly, her robes flowing like silver rivers, her crown scattering shards of light across the chamber walls. Her gaze swept across the council and then landed on Elias. "You say he corrupts me," she began, her voice calm but heavy as glaciers shifting. "You say he weakens me. And yet, none of you could survive what he has survived. None of you could hold the shard without it freezing your veins. None of you could defy the storm and walk back alive." Her words cut through the chamber, but the tension did not ease. The ambitious man smirked, bowing slightly. "Then let the people decide. If he truly is chosen, let him prove it. Not before the storm, but before the eyes of Carthion itself. A duel, trial by combat. If he survives again, then perhaps fate protects him. If not, then fate ends this charade." The council murmured in agreement, voices rising in unison until the chamber pulsed with hunger for blood. The queen's eyes hardened, though something flickered beneath their glow. She turned to Elias, her voice steady but lower now, meant only for him. "Will you fight, human? Will you face their doubt with steel instead of words?" Elias straightened, his body still aching from wounds not fully healed, but his voice carried with the clarity of truth. "If that is what it takes to prove I am no liar, then yes, I will fight." The council roared their approval. The ambitious man's smirk widened, satisfaction gleaming in his eyes. He thought this duel would end what the storm had failed to do. The arena was carved into the heart of the palace, a vast circle of ice surrounded by towering pillars that reached into the frozen ceiling. Torches burned high, their light reflecting endlessly across the crystalline walls until the chamber glowed with blinding brilliance. Hundreds gathered, soldiers, servants, nobles, all eager to see the human tested once more. Elias stood at the center, clad in armor heavier than he preferred, a blade forged of black ice in his hands. The weapon felt strange, humming faintly with energy, its edge sharp enough to split stone. Across from him, his challenger stepped into the ring. It was no surprise, it was the ambitious man, clad in obsidian armor etched with runes of frost. He looked like the embodiment of Carthion's wrath. His weapon was a halberd of jagged crystal, taller than Elias himself, its blade shimmering with deadly light. The crowd hushed as the queen appeared upon her throne, overlooking the arena. Her gaze swept across the chamber, then settled on Elias. He felt the weight of it in his bones. He did not know if she wished him victory or survival, but he knew one truth. He could not fall here. The horn sounded. The duel began. The ambitious man moved first, his halberd cleaving through the air with a speed that belied its size. Elias dodged, rolling across the frozen floor, the weapon slamming down where he had stood, the ice cracking under its force. He rose quickly, his blade flashing upward, but his strike was parried effortlessly. The crowd roared, soldiers pounding their weapons against their armor in rhythm. The man pressed forward, his strikes relentless, each blow sending shockwaves across the arena. Elias blocked, dodged, countered when he could, but every clash rattled his bones. The man was stronger, faster, born of this frozen world. Elias was an intruder, surviving only by will and instinct. But instinct was enough. He let the man's fury overextend him, dodging at the last moment, his blade cutting shallow across his opponent's side. The crowd gasped. The man staggered, then snarled, his amber-glowing eyes burning brighter. "You think you matter to her?" he hissed, his voice carrying across the chamber. "You are nothing, human. Nothing but warmth she will extinguish when it pleases her. Elias said nothing, his breath harsh in the cold air. He raised his blade, steadying himself. The man attacked again, his fury unchecked, his strikes reckless now. Elias blocked 1, 2, then ducked beneath the third, driving his shoulder into his opponent's chest. The larger man stumbled back, his halberd scraping across the ice. For a moment Elias thought he had gained the upper hand. But then the man's foot lashed out, catching him across the jaw. He fell hard, his blade skittering across the floor. The crowd roared again, the sound thunderous. The man raised his halberd high, aiming to end it. Elias rolled, barely escaping as the blade shattered the ice where his skull had been. He scrambled for his weapon, fingers closing around the hilt just as the halberd came down again. Steel met crystal, sparks of frost exploding outward. They clashed again and again, each strike a battle of survival. Elias's muscles screamed, his lungs burned, but he did not yield. Every time the man sneered, every time the crowd cheered for his death, he pushed harder. Not for himself, for her. For the queen who watched in silence, her amber eyes betraying nothing, yet holding everything. At last, an opening. The ambitious man swung wide, his rage blinding him. Elias stepped inside the arc, driving his blade upward. The black ice split armor, biting deep into flesh. The man's eyes widened in shock, his weapon slipping from his grasp. He staggered, falling to his knees. The arena fell silent. Elias stood over him, his blade raised, the crowd holding its breath. He could end it now, end the doubt, the whispers, the hatred. But as he stared into the man's eyes, he remembered the prisoners in the courtyard, the choice he had given her. Mercy. He lowered the blade. The crowd erupted in gasps, shouts, fury. The generals shouted for blood, soldiers pounded their weapons. But Elias turned, his voice steady, carrying across the chamber. Strength is not in killing when you can. It is in choosing not to. The queen rose slowly, her eyes locked on him. The chamber stilled, waiting for her judgment, and for the first time in living memory, the faintest smile touched her lips. The silence in the arena was deafening, more powerful than the roar of any crowd. Elias stood, his blade lowered, his chest heaving with exhaustion. At his feet, the ambitious man knelt, blood seeping through the cracks in his obsidian armor, his eyes blazing with hatred even in defeat. He waited for the final strike, the one that would end his story, but it never came. Instead, Elias turned away, his voice steady, his decision clear. Mercy, he repeated, his words echoing against the crystalline walls of the arena. Strength is mercy. Gasps rippled through the assembly. Some scoffed, others muttered curses under their breath. For warriors bred on a world that had known only cruelty, mercy was alien, unthinkable. Yet the moment was not theirs to decide. The queen rose from her throne, the amber fire in her eyes sweeping across the arena like a burning storm. Her steps were slow, deliberate, every movement echoing like the fall of icebergs. She descended from her dais, the court parting in uneasy silence, until she stood beside Elias. Her gaze flicked briefly to the wounded man, then returned to Elias, searching his face, as though looking for the truth buried beneath his exhaustion. "You had victory," she said, her voice calm but edged with something deeper, something unsettled. "You had the right to kill him. Why deny it?" Elias straightened, his broken body screaming against the effort. "Because killing him proves nothing. Mercy shows that I am stronger than vengeance." The words struck the chamber with the weight of truth. The queen's gaze lingered on him, and for the briefest flicker of time, the unshakable frost around her cracked. A softness, fragile as snow, passed through her eyes before she turned back to the crowd. "Enough," she declared, her voice rolling like thunder. "The duel is finished. The human has spoken, and his choice is mine to uphold. He will not kill. The storm has chosen him once, and tonight mercy has chosen him again. Let it be known, Elias Carter is under my protection." The chamber erupted. Some cried out in outrage, others bowed their heads in reluctant acceptance. The generals exchanged dark glances, their whispers sharp as knives. But none dared speak against her directly. The wounded man was dragged away, his glare burning into Elias, even as blood dripped onto the frozen floor. He had lost the duel, but his hatred remained, festering like a wound. Elias knew it was not the end of him. It was only the beginning. Later, Elias found himself summoned not to his chambers, but to the Queen's private hall. It was smaller than the throne room, though no less imposing. Ice walls rose like jagged towers, but here torches burned brighter, casting warm shadows across carved reliefs of battles long past. She stood near the far wall, her back to him, her crown set aside, her dark hair falling like rivers of shadow across her shoulders. "You defied them," she said quietly, her voice softer now, almost human. "You denied them the blood they demanded. Do you know what you've done?" Elias stepped forward, his footsteps echoing softly. "I gave them a choice they don't understand. And maybe that's what terrifies them." She turned, her amber eyes sharp but searching. "You've set yourself apart. They see it as weakness. They see me as weakened for allowing it. My court fractures with every whisper. And yet," her voice faltered for the briefest moment, a crack in the armor of centuries, "and yet I cannot find anger in me for your choice. Why?" Elias met her gaze, steady despite the storm he knew he walked into. "Because maybe you're tired of being what they call you. Heartless. Maybe you want to be more." Her breath caught, though she masked it quickly. "Careful, human. You tread where even storms fear to go." "And yet here I am," he said softly. The silence between them stretched, charged, dangerous. Then almost imperceptibly, her lips curved, not in a smile but in something fragile, something she had not shown in centuries. "You are either a fool, Elias Carter, or the bravest man I have ever met." "Maybe both," he answered, and for the first time she did not correct him. But not all eyes in the palace softened. In the shadows of the outer halls, the generals gathered. Their voices were hushed, their faces hidden beneath hoods of frost, but their fury burned hotter than any flame. "He undermines us," one growled, his hand tightening on the hilt of his blade. "The Queen listens to him more than her counsel. He poisons her judgment." Another leaned forward, his voice sharp as ice, cracking underfoot. "Worse, he stirs something in her. Something we were told was buried forever. If her heart returns, if she forgets the cruelty that made us strong, Carthion will fall." The ambitious man, his wounds bound but his pride festering, spoke last. His eyes gleamed with malice. "Then we end him. Not in the arena, not in the storm. Those chances are gone. We end him in silence. The Queen may protect him, but even storms cannot guard against a blade in the dark." The others nodded, their pact sealed in whispers colder than the ice around them. Elias felt it in the days that followed. The air around him shifted, colder even than before, but not from the planet, from the people. Guards lingered longer near his chambers. Servants glanced at him with something between pity and fear. Even the soldiers, once merely suspicious, now looked at him as though he were a threat. And yet amidst the shadows there was light. The Queen summoned him often now, not for council matters, not for politics, but for something far rarer, conversation. She asked of his world, of the suns that warmed the council's planets, of the oceans that stretched for miles without freezing. He told her of forests that sang in the wind, of cities that touched the skies, of laughter shared by people who had no crowns, no thrones. She listened, her eyes burning with curiosity. Her silence filled not with judgment but with yearning. One evening, as they stood together on the balcony overlooking the frozen plains, she spoke words he never thought he would hear. "They said I had no heart," she whispered, her breath misting in the cold air. "But when you speak, Elias, I feel something stir within me, something I do not understand, something I fear." He turned to her, the storm winds brushing against his cloak. "Then maybe it isn't fear. Maybe it's hope." Her eyes met his, and for a moment the world fell away. The storm, the whispers, the hatred. For a moment there was only fire in ice, warmth in frost. But deep in the palace, the conspirators sharpened their blades, waiting for the night when the Queen would look away. The palace of Carthion, had always been a fortress of silence, but now the silence felt heavier, darker. Whispers were no longer hidden. They slithered openly through the halls. Guards exchanged words under their breath, their amber-glowing eyes flicking to Elias with suspicion sharpened into hate. Servants bowed lower when the queen passed, but their gazes darted toward him like daggers when she could not see. He felt it in every corridor, every chamber. The storm had not ended. It had simply taken a new form. Elias tried to focus on his purpose, to remain calm beneath the weight of their scorn. He walked with his head high, even as soldiers muttered curses at his back. Yet each night, when he returned to his chamber, the unease gnawed deeper. He was no stranger to danger. Battlefields had taught him to read the air before an attack. And here, in this frozen fortress, the air was thick with warning. Still, the queen summoned him. She called him often now, away from the prying eyes of her council, into chambers where the walls glowed faintly with captured starlight. She asked him about Earth, about the taste of rain, about the sound of oceans crashing against endless shores. And he told her of warmth, of laughter, of a world where frost was not eternal. She listened with the hunger of one who had ruled too long in silence, her eyes softening, her voice lowering, as though she feared her own counsel hearing her dreams. Yet beneath her curiosity lay conflict. She was torn, Elias could see it, torn between the unyielding ruler her people expected and the woman awakening within her. Sometimes, when she looked at him, her gaze burned with something that could melt glaciers. But always, just before it broke through, she turned away, her face cloaked again in frost. The night of the attempt began like any other. Elias returned to his chamber after a day of silent glares and whispered threats. The shard of Carthion pulsed faintly on the table beside his bed, its glow steady, calming. He sat beside it, exhaustion pulling at his bones, when a faint sound brushed against the silence, a scrape, a whisper of steel against stone. His instincts flared. He rose quickly, his hand finding the shard. The glow brightened, as if responding to his fear. The door exploded inward, shattering into shards of crystal. Figures cloaked in black stormed inside, their blades gleaming with frost. There were 3 of them, assassins clad in armor darker than the ice, their faces hidden behind masks etched with runes. Elias barely had time to react before the first lunged. He rolled aside, the blade cutting deep into the bed where he had sat seconds before. The second swung wide, sparks flying as steel scraped against the crystalline wall. Elias gritted his teeth, clutching the shard in one hand, its glow intensifying. The assassins hesitated, their eyes narrowing. "He wields it," one hissed, his voice muffled behind the mask. "Then we end him quickly," another growled. They attacked together, blades flashing like shards of frozen lightning. Elias ducked, parried with instinct, his body moving on the memory of old battles. He had no sword, no armor, only the shard's glow and the will that had carried him through the storm. The first assassin struck low, but Elias slammed the shard against the blade. Frost erupted outward, the weapon cracking as though struck by fire. The assassin staggered back, howling as ice crawled up his arm. The second came from behind, his blade slicing across Elias's shoulder. Pain burned hot, but Elias spun, driving his elbow into the attacker's mask. The glass-like surface cracked, revealing pale blue eyes that widened in shock. The third assassin leapt, blade raised high, but before it could fall, the air itself froze. A sound like thunder cracked through the chamber, and the assassins were hurled backward by a force that was not Elias's. The walls glowed brighter, the shard pulsing violently, and there she stood, the queen. Her robes billowed as though caught in invisible winds, her eyes burning brighter than molten suns. She raised her hand, and the assassins froze in place, their bodies locked in invisible chains of ice. They writhed, their weapons clattering to the floor, their masks shattering under the weight of her power. "Traitors," she said, her voice a blade of pure frost. "You dare strike under my roof? You dare touch what I have claimed?" Her words shook the chamber. Elias staggered, his breath heavy. blood dripping from his shoulder. But he could not look away from her. In that moment, she was not the heartless queen the galaxy feared. She was fury incarnate, a storm given form, and all of it directed at those who sought his death. The assassins struggled, but her grip tightened. Their bodies began to crystallize, ice crawling over their limbs, their faces, sealing them into statues of frozen agony. Elias stumbled forward, his voice hoarse. "Wait!" She turned, her power flickering at the interruption. "Don't kill them," he said, his voice weak but firm. "Not like this." Her eyes blazed, confusion warring with fury. "They came to kill you. They would have succeeded if not for me. Why should I show them mercy?" "Because if you do," Elias said, clutching the shard tighter, "you prove them right. That you are only wrath, that you have no heart. But if you spare them," he faltered, pain surging through him, but forced the words out. "Then you prove you are more." The chamber pulsed with silence, the assassins frozen mid-scream, the queen's eyes locked on his. The weight of centuries pressed down on her, the burden of rule, of cruelty, of fear. And now, in the flicker of his broken voice, she felt something she had long denied: choice. Slowly, she lowered her hand. The assassins collapsed to the ground, shivering, broken but alive. Guards stormed into the chamber, eyes wide at the sight of their captured brethren. "Take them," she commanded, her voice still steel, but no longer edged with death. "They will face judgment, not execution." The guards bowed, dragging the assassins away. Silence fell once more. The queen turned back to Elias, her eyes softer now, though her face remained carved in frost. She stepped closer, her hand brushing his wounded shoulder. Frost spread from her touch, numbing the pain, sealing the wound. "You would have died tonight," she said quietly. "Without me." "Maybe," Elias whispered, his breath unsteady. "Or maybe the shard would have saved me." Her lips curved faintly, the ghost of something like a smile. "You think yourself untouchable, human?" "No," he said, meeting her gaze. "But I think you care more than you want to admit." Her eyes widened, just for a heartbeat. Then she turned, stepping back, the frost settling once more around her. "Rest," she commanded, though her voice trembled faintly. "Tomorrow we face the council. They will not forgive this night, and neither will I." Elias sank onto the bed, exhaustion finally overwhelming him. The shard pulsed beside him, steady, alive. And as the queen's footsteps faded, he knew the truth no storm or blade could deny. The woman the galaxy called heartless had risked everything to save him. And in doing so, she had revealed her greatest secret. Her heart was waking. The council chamber was no longer a place of order. The morning after the assassination attempt, its crystalline walls shook with voices raised in fury. Generals, advisors, and captains crowded the floor, their shouts colliding into chaos. The air itself felt alive, humming with tension that threatened to shatter into violence. "They must be executed," one roared, slamming a fist against the icy floor. "Assassins cannot be shown mercy. To spare them undermines your throne." Another spat words like venom. "The human corrupts you. His weakness spreads like rot through our court." "Already," soldiers whisper, "already they doubt your strength." The ambitious man, his wounds barely healed, stood tall among them, his voice the sharpest blade of all. "Majesty, you have lost your way." "You protect him while your own bleed. You grant mercy where death should reign. If you will not act, then we will." The chamber erupted, the noise reverberating like an avalanche. But upon the throne of ice, the queen remained still, her robes draped around her, her crown casting fractured light across the room. Her eyes burned like fire locked in crystal, and as the shouts rose higher, she rose to her feet. The chamber fell silent, her voice cut through the stillness, cold and absolute. "You speak of mercy as weakness. You speak of my judgment as corruption. But hear me now, my will is not for you to question. My strength is not yours to measure." Her gaze swept the chamber, lingering at last on the ambitious man. "You think me softened. You think this human bends me. But tell me, who among you has faced the storm and lived? Who among you has held the shard without frostbite? Who among you has seen the storm bow? Silence followed, heavy and suffocating. None moved, none spoke. Elias stood at the edge of the chamber, his body still aching from wounds, but his eyes fixed on her. He had no words to give her now. This was her battle. All he could do was stand, unflinching, and let her know she was not alone. The queen stepped down from her throne, her presence towering, every footfall echoing through the chamber. She stopped before the ambitious man, her eyes piercing into his. You challenged him. You sought to kill him in the dark, and yet he lives. Do you know why? The man sneered. Because you chose him over us. No, she said, her voice steady as the glacier. Because Carthion chose him over you. Gasps rippled through the chamber. The queen turned, her voice rising now, a storm unleashed. You have called me heartless. For centuries I wore that crown. I ruled with cruelty, and you followed because you feared. But fear is not loyalty. Fear breaks. Fear betrays. And last night proved it. Your blades turned inward, not outward. Your loyalty is to yourselves, not to me. The generals shifted uneasily. The advisors bowed their heads. Even the ambitious man faltered under the weight of her words. Then she said the unthinkable. For the first time in centuries, I will not rule by fear. Her voice rang like thunder. I will rule by choice. By strength, yes, but also by mercy. And if any dare call this weakness, then face me here and now and see if weakness can shatter your bones. The chamber was silent. No one moved. She turned, her gaze finding Elias. He felt the air shift, heavy with meaning. For a heartbeat, the mask of frost fell, and the fire beneath blazed openly. You say mercy is strength, she said, her words softer now, meant for him though all heard. Perhaps you were right. Elias's throat tightened. He bowed his head slightly, his voice low. Perhaps you already knew. A murmur spread through the chamber, softer this time, uncertain. The queen raised her hand. The assassins will face trial, not death. Their betrayal will be judged by the people, not hidden in silence. Let it be known, the age of fear is over. A new age begins. The council bowed, some reluctantly, others in awe. None dared oppose her now, but the ambitious man was not finished. He drew his blade, his fury boiling over. You are no queen of mine, he roared, charging toward her. Time slowed. The chamber gasped. The blade gleamed. Elias moved. He stepped between them, his body still broken, his wounds raw, but his will unshaken. The blade struck, not the queen, but him. Steel met flesh, the sound echoing like ice breaking across a frozen lake. He staggered, blood staining the shard he still carried, its glow flaring bright. The chamber froze in shock. The queen's scream tore through the silence, a sound that shattered centuries of frost. She raised her hand, and the ambitious man was hurled backward, his body slamming into the wall with the force of an avalanche. He crumpled, broken, unmoving. She fell to Elias's side, her hands trembling as they touched his blood. Fool, she whispered, her voice breaking, her amber eyes burning with something the galaxy had said did not exist. Why would you do this? He forced a smile, his voice faint but steady. Because they said you had no heart. But they were wrong. Her breath caught, her tears freezing on her cheeks. She pressed her hand against his wound, frost spreading, sealing, saving. Do not leave me, she whispered, her voice a vow, her heart laid bare. Not now. Not when I have finally found what I lost. The shard pulsed between them, its glow brighter than ever. The chamber filled with light, casting away shadows, silencing whispers. The council bowed as one, not out of fear, but reverence. For the first time, their queen stood not alone, but with another at her side. Elias's breath steadied, the pain fading beneath her touch. He looked at her, truly at her, and saw not a throne, not a storm, not a legend, but a woman who had carried frost too long. And in that moment, as the light of the shard filled the hall, the galaxy's oldest lie crumbled. The ice planet queen had a heart. It was his. If you've followed this story until the end, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. There are more journeys, more worlds, and more forbidden tales waiting among the stars. Join us and step into infinity.